Hello everybody, this is Stephen House and this is Full Time Devils. There has been a huge referendum which has led to you guys asking us a ton of questions about what the United Kingdom leaving the EU is going to lead to for Manchester United and the wider footballing community. Now, we don't really know, but we know a man who does. This is Simon Chadwick. This is the professor, class of 92, professor of sport enterprise. This guy is an expert in the world of football business. Simon, thank you for joining us.
No problem. Good to see you.
So Simon, we've had a ton of questions off our viewers and we're going to get straight into them. So the first thing that I've got to ask you really is work permits. Will EU players need work permits like the current non-EU players do, such as like Ecuadorians and Brazilians and the like?
At the moment, we don't know. It's very uncertain what the likely outcome will be. But in theory, yes, there is a distinct possibility that European Union players will need work permits in the same way as non-EU players need work permits. Whether or not the regime that's in place for EU players and their work permits will be the same as non-EU players and their work permits remains to be seen. And that's going to be dependent upon the kind of deal that the British government negotiates with the European Union over the next 2 or 3 years.
So we could see some sort of example where the current non-EU players, which is 3 or 4 that were allowed in a squad, we could have something along the lines of where it's like a second tier or a first tier. So EU players would require a work permit, but the regulations of the Premier League might allow us to have 6 or maybe even 10 in a squad, as opposed to having like a bit of a different system for the non-EU players.
It's interesting because we can speculate on what the likely scenarios might be, and this is obviously something for the fans to talk about. Is what kind of squads do you want to see in the future? Do you want to see squads dominated by EU and non-EU players, or squads dominated by English? Because obviously each of those scenarios will have potentially different impacts. And just to give you a couple of examples, I mean, one example in the Chinese Super League is moving to a 3+1 system for next season, which is in your first 11, in your starting 11, you're allowed 3 overseas players and 1 additional player who comes from another Asian Football Confederation country. So in essence, you can't play any more than 4 in a starting 11. So that's one model. The non-EU work permit regulations that we have in place already were negotiated by the Premier League with the government. And these are very different to, for example, if, for argument's sake, if an office worker came here from somewhere else overseas, they would be faced with a very different work permit regime to the one that exists in football.
Is it bad if UK academies have to rely more on homegrown UK talent?
So one of the things we have to balance is obviously playing English players in English teams and thinking about the benefits that potentially will bring, certainly in terms of the national team. And we balance that against the number of overseas stars that we have in our teams, because fans from around the world tune into the Premier League. They follow the Premier League because of these stars. And if those stars are not there, then potentially it does have an impact on the attractiveness of the league as a commercial entity, which means that maybe TV rights deals might be affected in some way. Possibly we might see some impact upon sponsorship deals. And so therefore it's not as straightforward as just saying teams full of English players, that's a good thing. Because as I say, I don't necessarily think that having teams populated purely with English players is going to have the international appeal that the Premier League currently does.
And not just from a commercial point of view, I think from a performance point of view, if you look at some of the nations that have got, you would say, second tier top divisions where there's perhaps not so many foreign influences, where there are more homegrown players. If you look at the Scottish League, the Brazilian League, the Dutch League, they're predominantly homegrown player-centric leagues, but their national teams are not performing. We saw what happened with Brazil in the Copa America. Holland aren't at the Euros this year. Scotland aren't at the Euros this year. So just the sheer fact that you've got more players doesn't mean that they're a better quality of players. That's an argument that I have with a lot of people all the time. Just because there's more players in an area doesn't mean that they're better footballers. There's tens of thousands of English footballers, and a lot of them are playing their trade down in League One, League Two, in the conference and stuff like that. Just because there was fewer Sergio Aguero's in the league doesn't mean that this guy's going to be playing up front now for England and for Manchester City or Manchester United. It doesn't work like that, does it? You've got to have the quality. And I think one of the things that we saw in the mid-2000s that was successful for Manchester United was that we had our loan agreements out there with Antwerp, where we would send several players over to Antwerp to get experience. Johnny Evans was one of the big names that really benefited from that at that time.
I think you're right, and it's all a question of balance, I think, because as I say, it would be good for English clubs to develop English talent, because although you might mention, for example, Holland as an example of a league where there are large numbers of domestic players, it doesn't necessarily have the impact on the national team. But then you look at Spain, and Spain likewise does have lots of domestic talent and does do very well in international competitions. So there are arguments both ways. I think my view of all of this is that whatever happens as an outcome of the referendum and us leaving the European Union, is it puts a lot of pressure on clubs, it puts a lot of pressure on leagues, because I think you're exactly right. Just to fill the space with average talent is insufficient and unsatisfactory, and that therefore demands that as a nation and as a group of people who love football, we've got to make sure that what replaces the system we have at the moment is as good as, if not better than, what we've already got. And so, as I say, if we think about an academy, I think it's very important that academies continue and that it's important that English players are part of those academy systems. But being part of an academy is not just simply about becoming a professional footballer and knowing how to kick a ball. I think there are issues around culture and understanding different culture and being exposed to the competitive pressures that different cultures bring. And competitive pressure for a footballer is very, very important. It's what improves footballers. It's what makes them better. And so, therefore, we've got to be thinking about ways as a nation of enabling our young people in academies and enabling our senior professionals too to be exposed to the competitive pressures that foreign signings and foreign managers have brought so far, in an environment where perhaps the number of foreign players and foreign managers in our leagues might be restricted in the future.
Staying with academies for a second as well, because this doesn't directly relate to United on one part, but it does on the other. Lionel Messi was at Barcelona Academy from 13, 14 years of age. We picked up Ronaldo at 17 years of age. So we consider Ronaldo a little bit like one of our homegrown products, even though he wasn't an academy player for us. Barcelona definitely consider Lionel Messi one of their academy products, and rightly so. That sort of signing wouldn't be able to happen under what is being currently proposed, would it?
Absolutely. I think the way in which work permit regulations work at the moment, the likes of a Messi under the kinds of work permit regimes that are being suggested as might be one outcome for this country, is we simply wouldn't be able to sign the likes of a Messi. Unless, of course, the Premier League and the football authorities in general were able to negotiate some kind of special arrangement with the government. But certainly, if you look at the non-European Union work permit regulations, particularly for young players, 13, 14, 15, 16, if those same work permit regulations were to be applied not only to non-EU but to EU players as well, then it would severely restrict the number of people potentially who could come here and turn out for our squads. I mean, the kind of players that spring to mind for me are people like Fabregas, for example. It's doubtful whether Fabregas, under the kinds of work permit regulations that are being suggested at the moment, would have been able to come when he did first time round. And so, we've got to think about this as a nation very carefully. We've got to think about what dispensations we would want. And I think it's for really the likes of the Premier League to negotiate firmly, decisively, confidently, assertively, to ensure that what we get is a system that retains the best possible parts of what we currently have, very cosmopolitan league that is appealing to people around the world, while at the same time acknowledging that we're in a very different work permit situation, and that what the government is trying to do ultimately is to control immigration, possibly. And I think it's very important to stress that to your viewers, is that whilst we may look at footballers and pay an awful lot of money to go and sit every Saturday to see what they do, they're still immigrants. And just as the country is seeking to control immigration more generally, footballers will be part of that process.
It's going to be a massive decision for the Premier League undertaking. Now, theoretically, could the Premier League impart some rules where there's no restrictions?
No, Absolutely not. The Premier League would be bound by national law. We don't know what that national law will be, and this is part of the process of Britain extricating itself from the European Union. But certainly once we've got ourselves out of the European Union and we've formulated a whole set of new laws related to work permits and immigration and any other feature of the labour market, the Premier League will be subject to those laws just in the same way as every other industry is. Whether you're talking about banks or shops or factories, it will be exactly the same. The crucial thing is for the Premier League, before we get there, is they're going to have to lobby very hard, the government, and negotiate a deal with the government. And as I said earlier, there is a precedent for this because the current non-European Union work permit regulations that we have in place already were negotiated between the government and the Premier League. They agreed those rules together, and that's what we're probably looking towards again in the future. But once the deal is done, that's it. The Premier League will not be allowed to go beyond that because it will breach national laws.
But they couldn't instruct their own regulations on it, where they say yes, there are work permit requirements for, say, Spanish players or French players like we've currently got, but we will allow you to have 20 non-EU players in the squad. They wouldn't be able to do that.
Absolutely not. What they would, if the Premier League went its own way and imposed its own rules and regulations, it could potentially be subject to prosecution by the state for breaching national law. And I'm sure that the Premier League would not want to get into a situation where it's in conflict with the government. I'm not suggesting that Richard Scudamore is about to be sent to jail for all of this. But knowing what I know about the Premier League, they will be very, very keen to maintain good relationships with the government. They both need each other. They both make a contribution to one another. They've shown in the past they can work together in the area of work permit regulations, and so I think that's what the outcome will be. We'll get a system that somehow preserves the best features of English football, but works within the spirit of the more general rules and guidelines around immigration and work permit issues.
All right, I've got a long-winded question here for you, and there's like several parts to it. So how is this going to impact the Premier League financially? How is it going to impact the clubs financially? And do you think this sort of uncertainty, while we're still waiting for the regulations and the laws to be written from the government, is affecting transfer windows right now? Do you think there's any clubs currently reluctant to offer someone a big 5-year contract if they're an EU national because the regulations might change in 24 months' time?
If I could answer your questions backwards first, I think we're in for a little bit of an unstable and uncertain time. Certainly, to my knowledge, I was speaking to somebody on Friday morning when just after the Brexit result was announced. This was somebody working in football finance, and they were working on behalf of a client who was about to invest a significant amount of money into football. And as I was in the meeting, the client called and said, "We're postponing our decision because the uncertainty around this means that we just can't commit to a financial deal at the moment." So this is what we're going to see is so long as there's an uncertainty, so long as we don't know what the outcomes are going to be, so long as we don't know what the rules and regulations around football are going to be, it will put some people off. So it may result in, for example, stadium construction projects being stalled. It may result in certain signings not going through that we thought might go through. And so, we will see an impact in that sense. I think to compound that, what you've got to keep in mind too is the way in which we've seen the exchange rate fall is not good news, not just for footballers, but for Britain in general. Because obviously if the pound is worth less, it buys less foreign currency. And so when you're buying a player in for example, Spain, and you have to pay in euros, it means you need more euros to pay for that player, so that the costs of clubs increase. Similarly, if a player is going to come and play here, I don't know, let's say from France, and the value of the pound falls, and it means, therefore, that when they go back with their pounds to France to buy whatever they buy in France, the pound will buy less. So it may well be that players and their agents start to demand more. So whilst I can't say it's going to be a financial disaster, and it's certainly not something I'm going to say, there will be a financial consequence as a result of what's happened. It will stabilise in the end. Whether or not it goes back to the same situation as we had this time last week is a different matter, but there will be a financial consequence. If people are spending less on sport, if people are spending less money going to see football, if people have less money to spend generally, then Britain as a marketplace is going to be less financially attractive. And it may well be that some sponsors respond to that by not signing the kind of mega sponsorship deals that we've seen in the past. So that could happen. Because already I've been made aware of at least one Chinese investor who is seeking to acquire a club in England following the exchange rate, the pound's fall in value. So when the pound falls in value, suddenly British things, British products, British companies, British football clubs become cheaper because the yen will buy more pounds. So certainly it'd be interesting to see how things happen with organisations and with investors, with sponsors coming from outside the European Union, because it may well be that the likes of the Chinese, the South Koreans, the Japanese take a much closer interest in investing in English football simply because it's cheaper.
And for all of our viewers that just got mega excited there thinking that the Glazers could be bought out, we trade on the New York Stock Exchange and it won't be affected, unfortunately. Simon, thank you very much. That was very informative. I'm hoping that had sort of like a negative feel to it. I'm hoping that that's not the outcome and that the outlook for Britain and British football going forward, but it's uncertain at the moment, isn't it? That's the only thing that we can say is that we don't know what's going to happen. We can guess, we can make educated guesses, but we don't really know, do we?
Well, I think for the next 2 years at least, we just assume situation normal, because for your listeners and your viewers who don't know, there is something called Article 50, and Article 50 is a particular clause in a country's relationship with the European Union. So the British Parliament needs to invoke Article 50 for us to formally start the process of leaving the European Union. That hasn't been invoked yet, and there are views that it may not be invoked until October, November, December this year. So for the time being, looking at it this positively, nothing's going to happen. It's going to stay the same. There may be some impact in terms of exchange rate movement and economic downturn, but in terms of work permits, nothing's going to change. When that Article 50 is invoked, that then gives a 2-year period for us to leave the European Union. After that 2 years, everything ends. Everything with the European Union ends. So I think for football fans all over the world, United fans or otherwise, is keep an eye out for that Article 50, because as soon as that Article 50 is invoked, then I think the football world will really start to change, and we'll really begin to see the impact of Brexit on it.
Right, Simon, thank you very much once again. Incredibly informative. Probably going to have to re-watch it myself and try and pull the more important bits out as well. Thank you to you guys at home for watching. If you've any questions, stick them in the comments below. Please give Simon a follow on Twitter. I'll put it on the screen in front of us here. Thank you for watching Full Time Devils. Like, subscribe and comment, and we'll see you soon.
Come on, you boys! Come on, you boys! Come on, you boys!